All right, we're live, and this week we've got Rod Waibel with us. So, Rod, why don't you go ahead and tell us where people know you from?
Well, gosh, they probably don't. And if I'm being honest with myself, I'm not quite that well known or anything. Although with my name, since I think I'm the only person on the planet with it, I'm super easy to Google. So there's no hiding there. I started, probably the things I'm most well known for would be about 10 years ago, I did Compact Heroes game for a successful Kickstarter, and that actually won a Game of the Year award from Die Hard Game Fan. So they might have first seen me around that time. The most recent thing I'm working on now is Chromatic Dungeons, which is a Kickstarter I just finished in August, September-ish. That was an OSR style rule book that I created. Basically, it was meant to be like a mixed match of the best things from 1E, 2E, and Basic Expert, but presented and designed in a way with modern design sensibilities and to be inclusive and representative of the gamers we are today. I mean, as we know, back in the 80s when we were starting gaming, or even the late 70s, it's pretty much all a white male club. And that's not mean that in a pejorative way. I just mean that's the reality of what it was. Most of us were just, white boys who were playing games. Mm-hmm. And the gamer makeup today is not that. I think the last figures I saw is over 40% female, and other minority groups, people of color, have significantly been increasing. So the reality is our gaming group, our hobby as a whole, has really, really expanded. So I wanted to be able to share some of those experiences from a rule set that I do believe is very good, to make it a little bit more appealing for our current gaming group today. It's really hard to get, the new generation of gamers in when they can't necessarily relate to anything that's to be presented in the book. So that was the key driver of that. Mm-hmm. The other driver behind it was to adjust the elements in the OSR that we'll talk to in a little bit about the more unfortunate toxic elements that are within the OSR. I'm sure we'll talk about it later. What I'm currently working on, they may know me from, is I'm working on Twilight Fables project right now, which is a 5e book supplement around European fairy tales and folklore from a historical context. Most of us, when we hear the word bugbear or kobold, we think of these D&D versions of imagery, because they've been that way for decades. So I wanted to go back and create a supplement or a book that was bringing back some of the original folklore. So think of more Brothers Grimm and less Disney. And there's a lot of rich material there. I'm not going to say I'm the first person that's doing this. So there's other people that have done it. They've done it for other systems. I know Andy Staples is really well versed and really well knowledged in this field, and he's worked on some things that's similar for, I want to say, Castles and Crusades. I hope I'm not messing that up. So it's been done for other systems, but I haven't really seen it with 5e that much, especially with the Wild of the Witchlight that just recently came out. I was looking through that book, and it's a lot of great information in it, but it still takes a modern interpretation of how D&D has interpreted things like hags and spirits and giants and all those other things. So that's my current project I'm working on. That's my most ambitious project to date. I'm really working on it to make it not competitive, it's not the right word. Comparable presentation-wise and quality-wise is something you would get from Wizards of the Coast itself. Mm-hmm. So I've sent you some of the previous images on my Twitter handle and my Facebook pages. I send out previews left and right. I probably spam the place with different previews and pages, so you can see what it looks like, on the inside and the presentation of it. And I'm really pretty proud of it. I'm really proud of the freelancers I've got to work on it. I've had an opportunity to get licensing agreements from Gerald Brom, which that he needs no introduction. And when you think of like a dark bay-themed style of art, Gerald Brom fits perfect in for that type of thing.
So you actually sent me some of the artwork for this, and I can put it up real quick. Give me just a second here, and you're probably not going to see it on your end because it's going to be on the Twitch channel.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Give me just
so we can.
A minute here.
Do you feel that by sharing like you do as much you do, it helps keep you on task or on track?
Yeah, I really like the feedback. I think there are two things that kind of drive me. One is the love for game design. I think all of us that have done game design at some level, we love it. I mean, what is the old phrase? If you want to end up with $1 million in RPG design, start with $2 million.
Yeah.
So it's very true. I don't do it for profit. I do it for love of gaming. The for me, I've had products and stuff that I've sent out to people, I give it to them, and when they give me really good feedback, it's like I win the lottery. That right there is the biggest reward. But I share it because I'm also a huge lover of fantasy art. You can't really see. I mean, there's a couple of pictures there, but around my whole office, I've got probably about almost 36 different prints and paintings all over the place of just all fantasy art. And so when I get this great art back from freelancers, I want to be able to share it and say, look what a great job Eric Lofgren did. Look at what a great job Jenna Drummond did. You know, I got Darlene the artist to do the logo for me on this book. I mean, so those type of things I want to share because they're great. I think they did an excellent job. And I just want to share the things. That's what we do, right? Is just to share ideas with each other.
Art was one of my favorite things when I was doing Venture Quarterly, when I was running that, was just art orders, just the art orders and cartography orders. I own a lot of regular maps because I go out in the woods and stuff at times, very used to. But I probably own more fantasy maps than I do regular maps. I mean, it's just like to the point that yeah. Like, I mean, I'm even counting, I probably have every single Exandria map that's currently out. But yeah, it's like, I love the art, I love the maps, I love looking at these things and looking just beyond it. Like when you look at a good piece of art, you're not just looking at what's in the foreground. You start looking in the background, look for the details, look for just everything becomes a lot more evocative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, just 1 second. Speaking of maps, you've probably seen maybe ads for this, but I couldn't resist.
Oh yeah, the Oregon Tolkienized Oregon map.
Yeah, I saw that. I fell in love with it immediately, and I said, okay, I got to get that. I got to get that and put it up because that's an excellent map.
Yeah, I saw
one of my favorite ones. I used to
haven't gotten it yet, but I love it. I think that's a great idea. I saw somebody else who did an Oregon map, a fantasyized Oregon map, and part of me is starting looking at that and going, you could actually do a detailed setting using the United States as the basis for it. It'd be a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah. I think a guy named Terry Brooks did something like that.
Yeah.
I was about to mention, because I have several of his maps, and over time, once he's given enough details, I started trying to figure out where certain things were, based upon both how they tell the stories in the books and the maps they've shared. He shared, because between the Night of the Word books and then the Sintra books going into, and then the Shannara books, they give you a fairly good detail about where everything's supposed to be, pretty much in the Northwest, but predominantly in Oregon.
Yeah. As an Oregonian, of course, the reading. Terry Brooks is one of my favorite authors. I probably have to admit my bias there, but it was when I was going through and reading those books, I was like, oh, that's totally just east of Eugene, and like, oh, this is totally the Columbia River Gorge, and so I had the most enjoyment. It sounds weird, not so much from the story itself, but from all the landmarks as you're following these characters make their way north, up through I-5 corridor, and so yeah, that was like a little Easter egg I enjoyed particularly.
I have to be
him and Ursula K. Le Guin were my favorites.
My entire exposure to Terry Brooks came from the TV series that wasn't great. It was on MTV. No. That's being kind to say it wasn't great. I was looking forward to it. I saw it, and I'm like, okay, obviously this wasn't geared towards me anyway, being an older Gen Xer. But I tell myself he was happy with it, so I gotta let it go. Mm-hmm. But it's like, oh my gosh, this is really not good.
I don't expect. It was like CW quality, like lower CW quality. Yeah. It wasn't bad. I enjoyed it for the most part, but at the same time, I'm like sitting there going, I wanted so much more.
Yeah, the characters are so much more. I gotta be honest with you,
though. CW quality, The Outpost, I kind of like that show.
Yeah.
I don't care if it looks just slightly better than Hercules and Xena. It's a fun show.
Anything better than Hercules. Xena's awesome. But... Oh yeah, no, it's weird though. Although the main actor, the one that played Will, he's about to be in a biopic where he seemingly does a pretty good job of being Elvis.
Mm-hmm.
Like a pretty good job for someone that doesn't really look like Elvis.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with the acting. I didn't mind the acting at all. It was this, I don't expect a TV series to marry perfectly with the books because that never happens. Like all the people that are losing their collective minds over Wheel of Time. It's like, get over it. And if they kept true to the books, then the first series, the first season of Wheel of Time would have been nothing but the first, still in two rivers, describing how the rivers work.
Yes.
I mean, say what you want about Robert Jordan, but he would spend a lot of time describing something relatively mundane. And so you can't do that in a TV series. But my issue with the Shannara series was it barely represented what was going on with Elfstones. They shifted all these different timelines around and threw characters together that were in totally different books. Like, we'll put Garrett Jax over here. We'll put it over here. We'll completely change gnomes into something completely different. And we'll have helicopters still around in like the background. I'm like, well, this is like 2,000 years later. You're not going to have a helicopter still sitting there. It reminded me of like a live action Thundar. And normally that would be a really great thing because I love Thundar the Barbarian. Mm-hmm. But with Shannara, it just didn't quite work for me. But again, I was not the target demographic for that. So I'm okay with, and everything I can tell from Terry is he was happy with it. So that's all that matters. Like,
yeah, at least he got that. Because like I know like Le Guin, she did not. There are various Earthsea things that happened that she still to this day is not thrilled about.
Yeah. So I think we got a little off track.
All right.
That's
we're here to chat. That's what we do.
She's passed.
All right. So I got a list of interesting facts that I thought we'd talk about real quick. Okay. All right. So this is taking gaming and putting gaming and frankly ourselves into historical context. Particularly if you're part of the OSR crowd. So, first of all, the publication of OD&D is closer to the start of the Great Depression than it is to the modern day.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
God, I'm only 1 year older.
Yeah, no, we don't.
If my beard turned any wider, I don't think it could. It is my birthday. I was born in 1974, so I was born in the year that D&D was born. So I joke around how the 50th anniversary is going to be my 50th anniversary. So I got to do something good about it. We were joking about that anyway because I'll be going to GaryCon this year, and the first day of GaryCon is also my birthday. So I'm like, man, I need to like somehow I can strong arm or twist like Luke to get me into like a private game or something like that while I'm there. But who I need to talk to about that?
I don't mean to brag, okay, but I was born in 1973. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Hey, well, I can for the most part, like you. But as Charles Barkley once said to LeBron James, just bring it home. Just bring it home. And so that's what I've been doing.
And I've actually mentioned that to my wife that it's thinning on top, and it definitely I don't have the Riker hair anymore. Why don't I just get rid of it? And she's like, no, you can't do that. Okay.
Mine is because I live in an area where if I were to shave my head completely...
Oh, they'd assume certain things about you.
They'd assume certain things. When I first came back to the area, one of the first things I saw was a red Chevy Blazer with the words white power and a giant stencil in the back window. And that wasn't here when I left in 97. So, yeah. Nope. Plus, I'm cheap. I don't like paying for haircuts. I just buzz it down with a 3mm and I'm happy.
Okay, so...
But yes, old.
Here's another thing on the list. The Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia all existed when OD&D was published. Yemen and Germany were divided, and the Iron Curtain stretched across Eastern Europe. Now, obviously, we lived through those things changing. That all changed in the early 90s. So, again, this is just historical context for D&D and things to make us feel old.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I saw they're doing a reboot of Twilight 2000, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And it struck me odd because, like you just mentioned, when the game came out, that was the era we were living in, the Cold War. So the game made sense for the context because it was... And so a remake, it was like, I wonder what they could do for a remake. I don't think they can capture that same feeling or atmosphere that made the game popular back then because we don't really have the same situations going on now.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have to make it more complex. It's going to have to be something more than just a war. It's going to have to be a war and then something else, or a war in this instability. Or...
Well, I mean, that's kind of why Red Dawn didn't work, the remake of Red Dawn.
Yeah.
Because nobody's really afraid of North Korea invading the United States.
Yeah, for sure.
You know that was supposed to be China, though, right?
Yeah, and then they didn't want to piss China
Like all the
off,
way through filming, it was China,
Mhm.
and then they had to go back in and fix it because, well, they realized we released this movie in China. We don't release it in North Korea.
Yeah.
All right, so all right, Gary Gygax is at TSR for 12 years, and that was a quarter of D&D's history. Wizards of the Coast has owned D&D for longer than TSR did.
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting.
Yeah, I mean, because, I started playing in 84, and it was TSR, and, followed it all the way up until 97, which is when it changed hands, and for me, it's like, that's my back history, and that's my childhood and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other thing you can tell the other thing that bookmarks some of our ages is for a bunch of us, when you say TSR, you think not just D&D, you think D&D, you think Star Frontiers, you think Gamma World, you think Marvel Superheroes, you think Top Secret. And
all my children.
Nowadays, you can't think any of that because those are all either not there or they're other places.
Speaking of All My Children, does not exist anymore. And my mother watched that show religiously. She was so upset when it got taken off the air. And I actually would kind of like to track down the TSR All My Children role-playing game and give that to her as a gift.
Nice. Yeah, that's also weird to think about how the cultural touchstones that pass in certain eras. And I think that's also why lots of games, even if you're using older rules and whatnot, always need to be updated in a way because certain touchstones change. Like my big personal one, since we mentioned soap operas, I'm an only child, single mother, and one of the big things she would do every day after she came home from work, especially when she was recording it, is she'd watch all of her soaps. But the big one was General Hospital. Now, if you're a kid of the 80s, everyone who even knew what General Hospital was knew what Luke and Laura was.
Oh, yeah.
And that story and the way it started could not happen today because it started out of an arc that included, just so everyone's aware of this, it was sexual assault. Like, it was not a romantic thing at all. It wasn't even framed as a romantic thing. It was like weeks later, they're like, they got really good chemistry. We want to keep them. We need to fix this. and they did, but there's no way that, it was horrible. It was horrible. And so, like, when you look at it in the modern context, even the actors involved, they look back on it like, and he's passed now, and I'm forgetting his name, Anthony Geary. He would admit, and he would talk in interviews for years, how he hated that.
Anthony Geary's gone.
Yeah, he passed away. Did he pass away? Or did his character? No, I think he passed away. I would have to look and confirm. I could be wrong right now and mixing up with his character, which they've killed off several times.
He's watching this right now, yelling at his monitor, saying, I'm alive! I'm alive!
Or enjoying, yeah. But still, I'm pretty sure he passed away a few years ago. But I'll go look later. If I'm wrong, everyone forgive me.
They're all Googling it right now.
I mix lots of deaths up in my head.
Yeah, I don't think you're
Sometimes
wrong.
Sometimes I have to remind myself.
I don't think you're wrong. I'm just surprised. That's all.
Well, and the thing I mentioned earlier, when I was saying Le Guin would be still upset to this day. Like, she's passed away years ago now, like several years ago. But there's all those recent deaths that some years we get so many of them in our cultural touchstones that we mix them up and mess them up. But getting back to on topic for what we do, like when you update a setting, like currently in my game, I'm using Exandria, not just because it's popular and I enjoy Critical Role, but modern sensibilities to a modern setting to where not everybody is. Not all goblins are evil. Not all not all humans are happy, or a mysterious gray area. Not all elves are good. I like the idea that one day the group could run into a golden dragon and just be utterly treacherous and hate.
No, I agree with you. And in fact, when I did Chromatic Dungeons, see, now you got me caught up on my own hiccup. Everybody up, and I'm catching myself.
I am
up.
chaos. So
it was with the modern sensibilities you're talking about. I love a lot of the rule sets from before, but it's not any specific mechanic from the old TSR eras. It was more of the style of gameplay it lent to, as opposed to any specific rule. Because when you pick up the remake that I did, alignment has been not completely tossed, but now it's more of like, Elric, where there's law, neutrality, and chaos. That's it. A bit like the basic expert set was. And it's not like evil or good. There's a lot of overlap in between all three of those. And it's just there for a minor placeholder because I think, and you could probably agree with this, since we've been playing for years and years, nobody is like one particular alignment for like their whole lives. We shift based on context. So I think that should be that way in the game. Your character is going to have different contexts and experiences. They may act lawful good one way and maybe chaotic good the next if something isn't wrong. So I want to give that flexibility. I added in heritages, which take over most of what the racial, quote unquote, racial modifiers were from the older editions. There are still races there, but they're less impactful than a specific heritage that you would pick. So you could be like a human race, but with a Fey ancestry. So you would get that resistance to sleep and charm from the heritage instead. So it's like what you're saying. It's more of incorporating, when we talk about modern sensibilities, it's more gray, less black and white. Because I particularly like those nuances. It keeps players on their toes, I think. If not all orcs are evil, and not all goblins are evil and like that. I mean, they can be. I think that's completely valid play style. I've played games where all those goblins are inherently evil, and that's cool. They can be in this setting. But from a default perspective, I don't necessarily support that, because it's not just me playing the game. And a lot of arguments I hear that are critical of the moves that Wizards of the Coast has been making in this shift is that, well, without them saying, chaotic evil, then how do I know how they play? It's like, well, you're the DM. Play them however you want to play. But I think knowing human behavior, I find it a disingenuous argument to say that it's not true to say that if someone looks at a rule, most people will treat that rule as the expectation play going forward. That is, if someone sees orcs are chaotic evil or lawful evil, most people are going to play them that way just by default. Right. They're not going to read a sentence way in the beginning of the book that says you can switch this if you want. They're going to see that's how it's defined as, and that's how they're going to do it, because that's how human behavior typically is. We see a rule for something, we typically follow that rule unless there's an exception somewhere else. So that's why I support it being gray as a default. And then each of us.
One of the things I liked about, because I did back Chromatic Dungeons, and I've looked it over, and I think it's a fine set of rules. But one of the things I like about it is, you have a discussion in the book where you're saying, this is the way it used to be done, this is the way we're doing it now, and the way that the way that you're used to may not necessarily be wrong, and you can still do it that way if you want to.
Yeah.
And that's what I liked about it, is you weren't. You weren't damning anybody's particular play style, but you're saying that to be inclusive, here's what we're doing going forward with this specific set of rules.
Yeah, there was an interesting conversation I had a few months ago when I was in the middle of that project. There was someone was saying, they made a comment that we've all heard. It's like, well, D&D's always been inclusive. We haven't pushed anybody away. It's always been there. And so then I showed them the Chromatic Dragons, and he's like, well, that's not for me because you don't even have a white male on the front cover. And I was like, did you hear yourself talk? Like 3 minutes ago, you just said that it's inclusive to everybody. It's not pushing anybody away. And now you're saying because you're not on the front cover, you're feeling excluded. So reconcile that cognitive dissonance a little bit. And imagine how everyone else who's not a white male feels when they pick up, early D&D stuff. And all it is white males on the cover. Mm-hmm. And there's still like dozens of white male illustrations in that book. I mean, there's a full page wizard for that Larry Emil did. So, yeah, I'm not like excluding white males from that book. That's a silly argument. I'm just saying that other people are playing the game and they should feel like the game's representing them, whether they be black, Asian, female, non-gender, trans, whatever it is. We play the game as a social function, right? Mm-hmm. And so the purpose of a social function is to have fun playing. And as you mentioned earlier, I really wanted to make a point of not beating people over the head by like bad, wrong, and fun. I am a huge fan of TSR era gaming. That's how I grew up. I still love it. I can still acknowledge there were some problematic areas with it, but we can still say that there's a lot of really good stuff there too. And we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm not accusing anybody who still enjoys One-E of being a bigot or misogynist or racist or whatever. That's nonsense as well. And that seems to be like a rallying cry going on with certain folks right now, is any criticism of my game means that you're calling me a bigot, like the disclaimer conversation that's going on. No, they're not calling you a bigot because you like this game. They're saying that some instances in those old materials, because they're a product of their time, have representations that would be considered problematic now. It's not saying that everyone who worked on it is a bigot or misogynist. That doesn't make any sense. But that seems to be the rallying cry some of these folks, the reactionaries, are grasping onto. And so I want to make it a point in a book to say, hey, look, You want to play all evil orcs, and you want to play hack and slash, and you want to play sword and sorcery with brothels and Fawford and, all that stuff. Knock yourself out. I'm not going to come take away your books. All I'm saying is that I want to make sure that everybody out there feels like they can be represented in this game from this era that I loved playing in.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is.
Part of the big problem that happens is it's really weird. There's a basic concept out there. It's called the fundamental attribution error. It's where if I'm standing in a crowd and suddenly I have to push my way through because I have to go to the bathroom really bad, or my kid has to go bad. So here I'm suddenly pushing through the crowd. I'm in my head hoping everyone understands I'm not being a jerk. There's an emergency.
Right.
While if you're the person witnessing it, most people will think the opposite. So like when you're in the moment where it's you doing it, you're hoping everyone understands it's an emergency. But usually what happens when it's reversed is you're watching this happen and you're like, oh, now you do that, or now you, like, most people have that fundamental attribution error where you won't give them the benefit of the doubt that you hope and assume is happening in your head when you're doing it yourself. And it's the same thing that you get with people when they're worried about, when you criticize something that they associate themselves with, they feel that you're calling them the problem when what you're actually doing is calling out the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Whether or not no one's saying you have to self-identify and throw yourself under the bus as being one of the bad guys.
Mm-hmm. And, and that, I mean, we know there's a lot of pushback, and
yes.
I mean, to some extent, I understand why certain people feel like they're being threatened. There's a lot of where was I going with this?
Well, I think I know where you're going with it, because there's been some statements made from the other side that really feed into that victim complex. I heard one person say the other day that 20 is just a murder simulation for minorities. And I'm like, oh, God, so that's not helping.
Yeah,
when you make a statement like that, all you're doing is validating the victim complex from the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a loaded statement to make in the first place.
Actually, I remember where I was going with this. Sorry, not to cut you off. But getting back to a lot of these same people who were around in that era of TSR and playing the games back then, and how many of them would have actually objected if a person of color wanted to join their group? I don't think too many of them would have, to be honest with you. I think that I've been at many gaming tables over my entire life where we had all kinds of different people sit down and play the game, and nobody was like, no, you can't be here. So having the game reflect the reality that these people exist and play the game and should be able to picture themselves, in this fantasy setting. How is that a bad thing?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it comes from the fact that, and I can say this as a white person easily, I think it comes from the fact that if we're talking about things where we see a white cultural moment happen, like as an example, I don't know a lot of people that are Irish that are constantly pissed at people that are English, unless they're people from Ireland that lived through the Troubles.
Mm-hmm.
And I get why they would be upset, because occupied army problems, all that, hundreds of years. I get that. But you don't see us doing it. Like, you don't see us, you might have an English surname or you might have an Irish surname, and we go off about. However, when it comes to people of color, minority groups, and whatnot, they're still living amongst the people that oppress them, even if you yourself weren't directly oppressing them.
Yep.
So if they start to complain about the oppressor, unless they're literally in your face saying, you held me down, you don't have to defend the oppressor. Your job at that point, and it's just normal, basic human understanding. Like, if you're the person that sits in front of a woman or a man that gets abused by their partner, and you just say, what did you do? You took the wrong side. You're supposed to be asking them what happened. Same thing culturally with people of color and whatnot. Like, if someone's talking about Native Americans being wiped out.
I would like to point out the fact that we're kind of discussing this on a theoretical level, and it is, it's not lost on me the fact that this is three white dudes here having this conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
I was just going to say, you're talking about Robert, it reminds me like the not all men thing, right? Well, of course, not all men are abusers, but it happens so often that unless you're an abuser, why do you feel the need to jump in and say, well, not all men do that?
And it's a statistics thing. Yeah.
And you guys probably don't know this about me, but I have a mixed race family. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have any additional insight into what it's like to be an African American in the United States, because I don't walk in that shoes. But I like to say that I have a little bit more insight than a typical white male does, because I have a mixed race family and I've seen those experiences firsthand. And I was thinking the exact same thing during what you're saying. So here's 3 white guys talking about race relations and everything.
Well, it's a hard thing because we're literally the default assumption, and it's like,
yeah. And to go back to your point, I think what a lot of the reaction thing is, as white people, I think of course, not all white people, but many white people, particularly white men, I think, are so used to being the majority and being the face of everything that when we are no longer the prime thing being focused on, it feels like you're taking something away. And I think that's where a lot of it may come from. It's not you're giving someone else an equal opportunity, but it feels like it's being taken away from you because for so long you were the one who was in charge of everything. And I think we as white men need to recognize that a little bit. And I think empathy goes a long way. And it's saying, okay, well, where is this other person coming from? I think listening has a lot of potential to help. Just, we don't have it here in this particular thing, but I'm assuming in future meetings and things like that, we'll have other people, other women and people of color on these different talks things, because just listening to them, understanding that not all black people are a hive mind, not all women are a hive mind. You're going to get, just because Candace Owens exists doesn't mean that all African-American women believe like she does, or, vice versa. But to take things in the context of, groups kind of as a whole. And when we talk about things like disparate treatment against minorities, oftentimes we'll hear someone say like, oh, well, Candace Owens doesn't believe that way, or I have a black friend who doesn't believe that way, so it must not happen. Well, yeah, that may be true, but what are the majority of African Americans saying? What message are they giving? Because we need to listen to that, because they're the ones that are experiencing and living through this on a daily basis. For me personally, anecdotally, it really opened my eyes seeing my oldest son, who is black, the experiences that he went through. Just an observer, we would go to like his football games and people would not assume that I'm his parent because I'm white and he's black. And you would hear people make comments. And it's like, this kid is dealing with this stuff every day of his life that we don't even think about. So this kind of, I know that privilege is kind of that loaded term, and now it's kind of become a bad word, kind of like woke is now, these words, but I think it absolutely is a real thing. And we should spend more time listening to folks. And when in the gaming terms, when they talk to us about inclusivity and being represented, that was really key for me to say, as a game designer and a fan of the OSR, well, all D&D in general, except for 4-8, no, I'm kidding. But particularly OSR, I think it is my duty as a game designer kind of OSR to listen to folks who aren't like me, to generations who aren't Gen X, and say, what are you saying? What are the problematic areas that you're seeing? Because how can I address that? How can I help making those things better? Like Chromatic Dragons, almost every single freelancer I hired was a minority. I was like, if I'm going to walk the walk, I need to talk, right? Or I had that backwards. So I'm going to talk, and walk the walk. So if I create an inclusive game and I only hire like white people to do all the freelancing artwork for it, well then,
yeah,
what am I
doing?
You're
not being inclusive there. So.
Yeah. So
I came from a similar background as well myself. My family is very diverse, and so as growing up, when I started to, it was weird for the first half of my life. I knew there were issues, and we were always against those, the bad issues. But it was never as I don't want to say vitriolic, but I'm going to say vitriolic now, as it is in the second half of my life. Like in these last decade and a half, 2 decades, things have verbally gotten more divisive, and it's so weird that sometimes I have to remind myself to either one, just let people know my familial background, but 2, to also sit there and say, sometimes I just got to stop myself and say, I'm mad about this because I'm mad for one of my cousins or for one of my aunts and uncles, but I got to pull back and just support people who have a more direct right to be mad about it, but also to understand why people are feeling this way. Because I have a background in psychology. It's like I can sit there all day and observe what's going on and tell you exactly what's happening for the most part, or at least roughly, approximately. But it's hard. For
me, the biggest eye-opener was when I was 19 years old and I got deployed overseas, and I was like one of the only white people around in this whole country. And that's when it really hit me, just taking a bus and realizing that all these things I took for granted, being a white male in the United States, I could open up a newspaper and there would be a white person on the front. You turn on TV, most of the channels were white people. They spoke my language. And so that's when I finally realized, wow, there are people in my country, the United States, that feel like I'm feeling right now. They don't have representation of them, either their religious beliefs or their ethnicity or whatever. And that is something that needs to be addressed from someone in a position of privilege as myself. So that was really, the seed was planted then. And then as I got older and had my family, I kind of moved on into this other thing. I just want to say one quick thing before I forget about the Chromatic Dragons, because you mentioned you were a backer of it. I know I had promised that at the beginning of the year I would have the revised, edited version out. I want to say this message to all the backers, because there were nothing rule changes that need to be changed, but there were a couple of grammatical errors, I think, within the book here and there. I think there's under the cleric section, deity spelled incorrectly, but I had another editor to go through and re-edit the whole thing, and that was supposed to be done in January. I promised everybody in January. Unfortunately, he had I'm not going to name names or anything, but he had a very significant personal thing happen to him in December and in January, and so that delayed it by about a month or so. So it's almost done. Once I get the editing back, I get that out. I'll resend out all the links for everybody. Everybody's going to get new copies of everything. So you'll probably get that email as well with those links set on there. I just wanted to put that out to everybody, because I haven't been radio silent, but one thing that really bothers me about Kickstarter programs is like when it's done, you never hear from the creator again, even if there were hiccups. And one of the things that was important to me is there have been so many failed Kickstarters in the past, Far West, that just never delivered, that I didn't want to be that way. So when I don't start a Kickstarter until I'm done with the actual project. In this case, I just had some additional editing that needed to be done. But everyone like yourself, you've got a copy of the rules. They're perfectly playable. It's just that I want to make sure that it's really polished for everything else. So I just want to kind of throw that in there before I forgot, that I haven't forgotten about the backers. I haven't forgot about you, Darren, or anybody else. That it's just that unfortunately my editor had a personal emergency that took him out of the game for about a month and a half.
Are you getting a lot of questions about this right now, or
not a lot?
Just kind of feeling like I promised this thing and it's not quite there yet. Better say something.
I've gotten maybe once every few weeks I get somebody asking me about it. A lot of times they're asking me about if I ever send it out to them, because either they didn't get the email originally or something. But I just want to make sure that communication is important. It's important to me as if I'm going to create something, I want to make sure that people are going to be happy with it. I'm not going to take someone's money and run. Really don't agree with that. So if people aren't happy or they want updates, I want to keep them up to date. And that's why, before I forgot and lost track of mine, when you mentioned that you were a backer, that I want to throw that out there, that I haven't forgotten about you. The editor still was working on it. If it wasn't for that thing, then I would have had that already done by now. So I appreciate everyone's patience.
Well, yeah, things happen. We know you're not a grifter. We know those people do exist in the industry, and we're not going to name any names, but we know you're not one of them.
Yeah, and I've had, for Twilight Fables, I've had a few artists, 3 now, that have said they aren't able to deliver on their contracts that I've contracted out to them, and for health reasons, for other things. And I suppose I could get mad and say, well, I've already paid you half up front or whatever, those type of things. But ultimately, I give a message to all of them. It's like, your health is more important than any game. So, if you have to delay and come back a few months from now, then that's great. Or maybe down the road, you can work on a project for me for something else. But I would much rather just take a hit financially that way than to turn things nasty, because I think our industry is so small that your reputation means a lot, or it should mean a lot. It's not very big. People talk, when you have freelancers and relationships, I think those relationships are incredibly valuable. So I would much rather be a humanist towards my fellow humans I'm working with, because things happen. One person got COVID, and it's like, well, gosh, take rest, get better. Don't worry about my art. Don't feel stressed. That's just my personal philosophy on things going forward.
Well, there's so many aspects of the model out there that needs to be updated. I still, and I'll blame part of this in the fact, I am a union guy, but there are still so many things where you suddenly expect work product from someone. You expect them to put 20, 30, 40 hours into what they're doing and not yet have been paid. Like, I get work for hire contracts, I get that, and I've been in them. I've been freelancing for 20 years. So I understand the whole, hey, I've done everything, please pay me. But part of that, it needs to be updated, because you're getting to a point now where you're expecting someone to put so much work, so much effort into it, that not paying them something, it's just abusive.
Yeah, well, let's be honest about something here. You're not really in the industry until you've done a project for somebody and not gotten paid for it. It happened to me fairly early on, not naming names because they might still be in the industry and their situation was just really bad at the time. it happens, and it's unfortunate, and it sucks. But you move on, and I agree with you that it's more important to maintain those relationships than to get really bent out of shape about things like that.
I've only had 2 unpaid moments, and every time I ever see that person, they look at me and they can't meet my eyes, so it's entertaining.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Art, because both of you are more on the freelancer side, right? The creator side.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm on the other side. I mean, I do most of my own writing, of course, but I do more of the hiring than anything else. So I imagine I hear a lot. There have been times when publishers, we get burned by freelancer artists. We pay them, they don't deliver for one reason or another. But I think that is much more infrequent than it is for you folks to have done work for someone and not been properly compensated for it. So that's where I kind of go with, I'd rather just take the hit, maintain the relationships than it is to try to burn either one of. I mean, because I'm up here saying this whole big speech on my pedestal and everything, and both of you as freelancers are probably going, "Oh yeah, we've heard that all before." Yeah, you heard all these speeches, but we still got screwed in the end. So I'm trying my best not to be that.
I can say you're better than most. I mean, I've known some publishers that don't go after the money. It's rare. I mean, it's in my opinion, in the visibility I've had. I've seen more publishers demand the contracts be upheld or demand things occur or whatnot. I think kill fees are sometimes a better option in some cases.
I think I'm in an advantageous role in that I'm not a full-time publisher. If I were a full-time publisher and this were my livelihood, I would probably be a lot more hardlining about it. Mm-hmm. But because I have a really good day job and this is my hobby industry, the things that I create, I have a lot more flexibility there. So if I get burned by a freelancer or whatever the case may be, it's not going to really hurt me that much. It's not going to hurt my livelihood. So I have an advantage that I have that more flexibility to make sure, my freelancers, I pay pretty much upfront. I have no problem doing that unless they're brand new. I've never heard of them before. Then I maybe half upfront, give me some references, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. But established folks, I have no problem just paying right up front. And I think that
I'll tell you what, I personally will not accept full payment up front simply because of the fact that if I don't, if I get paid the whole thing up front, I do not trust myself to deliver that product on time. So if we ever get into a situation, 50%, that's it.
Yeah, I think half up front. I think half up front should start to become more the industry standard.
Mm-hmm. I think so. That's my impression, is half up front. Some folks want full up front. Those folks I've noticed are usually the ones who are really well established. The Gerald Brahms, those folks. Folks
that know they're going to deliver. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. So I think relationships are really important. I don't want to burn any bridges. I mean, right now we're seeing some folks burn some pretty big bridges, and I can't for the life of me understand why they would ever want to do that. But the other thing I kind of want to segue into, because I am in this advantageous position, some folks have asked me about that contest that I opened up a couple weeks ago. I have it. It's on my website. I'm sure you have it linked in your Twitch, whatever. You can go to it. I decided to create a $1,000 prize to an indie small publisher. So anybody who works for a large company is excluded. Outside of that, you just need to be 18 years or older is one other limitation I had. It's all across the world, not just the US, but anywhere across the world. When I first started creating, 20 odd some years ago, I scrounged every dollar to hire an artist or get some stock art or whatever, just to get my module out so people can enjoy. So I know how people are struggling right now in that. And so the reason I created this is because I'm in a position now, Chromatic Dungeons did really pretty well. I was able to get a sizable donation to the Trevor Project and have some left over for these other things. So that's kind of taking that money and funneling into things like this, to where if someone is a small publisher, whether it's writing or they want to do an art book or an RPG book or whatever, here's $1,000 that you can use to help make that come to life. I don't care what you do with the money. As soon as we select the winner, then they're going to get the funds via PayPal as a friend, so they don't have to pay the fee. It's all be on my end. The only thing I caution against is that depending on where you live, you want to consult your tax professional, because usually there's implications for it's considered income in most states. But again, that's on them. It's basically like you send me the submission via the instructions. What are you working on? I like to see a synopsis of it. And the only thing I'm asking in return is that when we select the winner, that I can say, hey, here's who won it. Here's what they're working on. Go support this person. because I would have loved to have had that, for me. And there's no other criteria around that. I'm not taking any rights. I'm not preventing anybody from, going to Kickstarter later on or going to a different. There's literally no strings attached. It's like, all you got to do, send me what you're working on. If you're a small time publisher and the money would help you get this reach fruition, then you're in the running. And I've got
it's
probably about
like a grant.
Yeah, it's a private grant.
I've probably got maybe 50-ish submissions so far, but I think there could be probably more. I don't think the word's really spread out there that much for that. You have until the 28th of February to do your submissions, and then I gave myself until the March 7th to select a winner as I go through and re-review things. I'm already going through them and sorting out, like, here's some good candidates, here's some other ones that are probably not. And there's no, I had to be careful with. I had people submit things that, like, I know. It's like, well, you got to be careful. I can't, like Darren, if you submit the contest, hey, Darren wins the thing after having me on his podcast, it might cause some things.
Dang,
I really tried to
myself.
Yeah. Well, you're not technically disqualified or anything. It was just, I'd have to prove on the merits, say, hey, what Darren's working on, this is worthy of winning. But you have to be tricky with that, because when you start getting a type of, like, if somebody that I know, well, then those questions are asked, and they're legitimate questions. So I don't want to dissuade anybody from submitting. On the other hand, I really need to make sure that I'm judging on merits, and it's not just me. I'm having some people blind judge as well to avoid that process. I'm actually thinking of putting a second place prize in there as well, $250, because I'm going through some of these submissions and it's like, man, I really wish that I could help out, more than just the one person. I just don't have endless pockets to do that.
Right.
But that's something that I like to do. I think right now it's important to foster some goodwill in our industry, especially with things that are going on that are fostering bad will.
Yeah. That's a good way to do it. I mean, and also that thing happens about the whole, you start to see more and more, you're like, oh, this one's really good too. Because, like, what was it with the setting search back then when they got Eberron? They technically bought 3. Like, it wasn't just Eberron. There are 2 other settings that they bought that still, if I remember correctly, no one's ever seen. Although one of them technically got folded into Eberron, I think.
If I remember right,
because they bought them.
If I remember right, there were like 3 finalists. Eberron won. I believe that the settings that didn't make it, that were finalists, actually went back to the people who submitted them, and that's how FFG ended up doing Dawnforge. And I couldn't tell you about the third one.
I'd have to double check, because if I remember correctly, there's been several stories where they talk about that there's 3 of them that TSR bought or WotC bought that they kept. Like that included Eberron. Like, they were just like.
And I could be wrong. I just don't remember them buying 3. I remember them buying 1, but.
Because only one won the contest. That's the thing. The key part was Eberron won. It wasn't like 3-1. It's just the other 2. They're like, yeah, we're keeping these 2.
Yeah, and I firmly believe that there are some really good creators out there. They just don't have the resources to get known or seen. And I'm not really want to speak because I'm still a really small guy. I'm like way in the back. Hardly anybody even hears about me or knows about me, and that's fine. But I think some of the other folks, if I could give them a little bit of a launching pad, get onto Drive Through RPG, the stock art availability now compared to what it was 20 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like Dean Spencer. Dean Spencer is like one of the top fantasy artists I've seen. And he puts out a ton of stock art that's available for a really inexpensive price.
So actually, I'd like to interrupt you here for a second. Dean Spencer, Fat Goblin Games, he just put up a sale today. He's having some financial issues and some health things going on. He needs to raise a bunch of money really quick. He's put every single product, at least as far as I can tell, there's a couple of them that aren't because they're subscriptions or whatnot, but every single piece of art, every single adventure, everything they sell has been reduced to $1 for a few days. So if you want to help the guy out, and if you want to help yourself to some excellent stock art, it's there. It's going on right now. Go get it.
Is that Dean or is it Rick Hershey?
Oh, it's Rick Hershey.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Rick's a great guy too. So I mean, there's a lot of good art too. So the point's still valid. But
no, I'm just embarrassed now. That's all.
No, that's all right. But no, there is the stock art is no longer just stick figures, available. It is professional, top quality artists are out there Eric Lofgren's another one through Misfit
Yep.
Studios that there's a lot. And actually, I'm a little biased towards Eric because he's pretty close. He's up there in Victoria, Duncan, out the island up there. And he's a great guy, great artist, another really great individual to work with. I worked with Eric probably for 20 years, and it's been nothing but professionalism from him, nonstop. So I've got a whole laundry list of artists that are great to work with. That I've had. Jenna Drummond. Jenna Drummond is not on. She's mostly through. I think she uses Fiverr now for most of her commissions. She's another really, really great one to work with, and there's just so many. I feel so blessed now to be able to work with these folks, and not just the artist side. Traditionally, it's mostly the artist side because I do most of my own writing and layout. But now I'm going into some of the editing side, and now I'm expanding my editor pool. So if you ever need work for an editor, there, Darren, if you ever want to hire yourself out, and they have some work for you,
I'm available.
So I've had like Kevin Doc Watson do some editing. He's really good. But that I think is where my weakest point is. It's sad that editing is always the last thing to get done in a project. It's like that's the first budget to get cut. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, we'll just run it through Microsoft Word editing and whatever and call it good. And
well, I'll tell you something here, and I am in no way trying to say that editors are not worth the money. So don't even think that. But as you may or may not know, I worked on a video game for a couple of years before the studio went under, and I went in as a freelancer who'd done a lot of tabletop stuff. And the first thing I learned when I got there was that you're on staff as a writer. You do not get an editor. You are giving them clean text,
yep.
And it's got to be clean. I mean, you can go back and fix your own stuff, but it's entirely on you to make sure that this can be public facing. And that and it's really kind of a sink or swim moment when you get put into that situation. And luckily I was able to swim. So what that means in terms of my my game writing and my fiction is that I write pretty clean text, and then I'm able to go through my own stuff and make sure that it's fit for public consumption. Not a lot of writers can do that, and even the ones who can, a lot of the time they say I shouldn't do that. And the
hard part with editors too is finding what you mean when you say an editor. I've seen people when they talk about what they're trying to grab, I'm like, well, no, that's proofing. Oh no, that's copy editing.
Yeah,
no, that's an actual developmental editor. It's like done all the roles. I mean, I've also been an editor in chief, but it's if you're gonna do it, it's like you need to make sure you're aiming for the right thing. Like for the most part, most people just need copy editors. Like when it comes to a lot of gaming materials, copy editors.
Yep.
Once you start getting big and you guys are going for these overarching things, and you definitely need developmental editors because they can help you keep on task.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just give one piece of advice to aspiring writers and publishers out there, because I know that especially indie publishers, editing is not a reality to be able to afford, to spend $3,000 for an editor, for a copy editor. It would be to, when you do your writing, go back at it a week later, then 2 weeks later, print it out on physical paper and read it, and then read it aloud. So you're going over everything you write at least 5 times over a period of like 2 months, whether it's physical, digital, and then reading aloud. And you're going to catch most of the stuff that way. Because when you go back to it, then you can kind of figure it out. But if you can't afford an editor, at least have a friend that you're reading it to or to look at it, because people can't understand what's in your head when you're writing something out.
Right.
They don't know that what your tone is. So they can have something completely different.
You know what's in your head, they don't. And somebody reading it, they're not going to know that. But something else I'd also like to suggest is that know the rules.
Yeah.
Know the difference between active voice and passive voice. Know the difference between you, your, and your. Two and two. These are basic things that people are always screwing up. And that's so much of the battle right there is just knowing your basic stuff.
Perchance.
One thing I would suggest when it comes to if you're gonna self-edit, one of the basic things I always suggest to people, in addition to what you just said, was, and it's one of my oldest tricks. You write in one font, you edit in another font.
Yeah.
Because just changing the visual presentation of what you're seeing. It's why printing out also works, because now it's suddenly physical media. Mm-hmm. But if you change the font, you're looking at your own words different. and you're suddenly consuming them different. I always switch to a different font and then alter the size by a point or two in one direction or the other.
Yep.
And I go through and read it. But yeah, it's hard because that's also how you can find someone who's good at dialogue versus someone that's good at setting the scene or the evocative description of the area or the environment or whatnot. Because some people, when you read their dialogue, you're like, nobody talks like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then other people, you're like, okay, that's good. You probably sit there and improv very well and make up stuff that drives your DM crazy, if you're a gamer. But yeah, always change the font. It has saved me a lot.
All right, so we're actually down to about the last 5 minutes. So I would like to turn the floor back over to Rod. Anything you want to talk to us about for the last 5 minutes?
No, just thanks for having me on. It was great to be I live for discussions that anything is geek related. So being able to have a conversation with you guys was really, really good. It's nice to be able to share ideas with other people about like how do we improve our hobby and address toxic elements that were within it. And a lot of it comes down to like listening and that. Other than that, I may have some work for you for Twilight Fables, Darren, if you're interested. Once I get, it's pretty much 99% written right now. I'm just waiting on some other stuff. So within the next probably few months, if you're available, I know you did editing work before.
Oh yeah, I've done editing work.
Yeah. So that's my next biggest project. After that, I have a couple projects coming down the line that I think are going to be really, really good. One of them is I'm taking all those old Choose Your Own Adventure books, like Dungeon of Dread and those, and I'm converting them all to short adventures. I'm having homage art done. Obviously, I can't use the same art, but homage art to recognize some of those same old themes. Just real quick one-shot adventures, all those books that we enjoyed as a kid. But the big one I'll be working on next is a combat guide to fighting, and that is it's like those old swordsmanship, parchments from the Middle Ages. You think or the old kung fu books that we had when we were kids in the 70s. Like all the illustrated things of all different moves, except for it's going to be in pencil illustrative style of all different types of weapons and spells and creatures. So like if you're a player, like, well, what does a critical hit actually look like with a warhammer? So it would have like an illustrative section of this, or combat techniques with like a whip, or like two-handed sword, or how does an ogre actually fight compared to a panther, in combat, like agile versus brute. What does a firebolt look like when you score a critical hit and max damage on something? So it's just a fun little project that I'll be doing in the future. I got slated out, but I think it sounds pretty neat just to have, system agnostic, just like in that style of those old 70s karate books and, where you got the illustrations going through. So that's kind of what's down the road for Izegrim Creations anyway.
Yeah, it sounds really cool.
Other than that, I respond to questions pretty quickly on email. So if anybody has any questions for me or the contest or any of that information, just go ahead and shoot me an email at the website and I will respond.
Very cool.
And yeah, I mean, definitely if you're a creator and you need a little bit of money to see your thing through, definitely you want to look at this. So, and I think it's a great thing that you're doing.
Yeah, what's the main spot they can find that at?
Well, if they go to izegrimcreations.com, and I think you're going to have it in your summary, or I'm not sure how Twitch all works on it, the description. It's all there. It's on the front main page, and it's also, if you go down to there's a drop down of all the different pages within the website. One of those is a publisher contest. And you can just click on that. And it has all the rules and how it works, and really there's not that many rules. I just had to do rules for my own protection and for their protection. But really, when I say no strings attached, I mean no strings attached. I'm not out to get anybody else's ideas or use them. I really just want to say, hey, $1,000 would have helped me put a project to finish, even if it's just stock art or having someone look at it. And if that's what it takes to get someone out there to the first step, you never know what they'll end up being, because that was my first step. And now I can put out some pretty decent material. The people at Kobold Press would start out, everyone started at some point. So you never know what the launching pad is. And I think there's a lot of really good creators out there that gamers could really and benefit from their creations.
When you think about it, that $1,000 is $20 an hour for 50 hours. I mean, that's a lot of ability to suddenly be able to afford to focus yourself on a project.
That's true.
And again, I don't care what people use the money for. I really don't. I understand going right into it that some folks would probably use most of that money to pay a bill or whatever. And I'm totally okay with that. Because if it's used to pay a bill to relieve stress so that you can focus on like something else you're working on, then it's still, it's indirectly still relating to that. So I don't care. I really don't care how people use it. I would prefer that they would use it in something to create, but I'm not awarding it based upon their promise that they're going to put out a book. I'm awarding it because what they've given me looks like a really great idea that just needs some additional funding to help reach finalization.
It helps move the ball down the field. It helps get you a little bit forward, a little bit, whether they're hiring an artist or paying themselves or buying a laptop to help write on, like their old machine's going away.
Exactly, especially for something like a laptop. And really, it's because I think our community really needs to focus on more positive things. There's so much toxic elements coming out right now that are the focus of all the news, undelivered products, all that kind of stuff. So I want to say, hey, let's look at some positive things, because even outside of the gaming world, there's so much crap going on. It's like, let's just try to. I'm just a small guy. I'm not WotC. I'm not.
Well, you're a small guy, but you're doing good work, and that's why. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on so early. In this, because we just had Jeff Grubb as our first guest. So you're our second guest. Like I said, I really respect the types of things that you're doing. Mainly because you're trying to increase the inclusivity of the hobby. The contest is trying to bring more people in and get them started. And, I see you being, you might be small, but you're definitely doing good things. So we really like that.
One last thing real quick, so I know we're first at a time. I will be DMing a few sessions of Chromatic Dungeons at GaryCon. So if people are willing to put up with my outrageous French accent as I run Castle Amber using Chromatic Dungeons, there are still some slots, I think, open. If you go for attendees at GaryCon, if they want to go there and listen to my horrible accents as I DM a few sessions, sign up.
All right. Well, we are a little bit more than out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. Rod, you can hang out for a little bit afterward, and we'll chat a little bit more. So until next time, this is RPG with R&D. I'm Darren Drader.
Robert Emerson.
And Rod Waibel.
All right. We'll see you next time.
So despite me saying how much I hated my voice